The frost should have claimed him. Surrender should have been his only recourse. Yet, discovered entombed in snow, his frame racked with shivers, a single paw protectively covering a diminutive form, it became evident this was no common canine. He was a warrior unadorned by rank or insignia, a German shepherd, starved for days, his fur concealing bleeding wounds, yet he remained steadfast, for beneath his rib cage a fragile existence persisted. And upon witnessing the object of his protection, their shouts pierced the frigid air. What unfolds is a narrative of unwavering devotion, sheer survival, and a love so profound it could move celestial beings to tears. As we embark on this account, we invite you to connect with this story. If you hold the conviction that even in the most desolate, icy expanses, warmth can emanate from a dog's heart, consider showing your support, sharing this tale, and together let us illuminate for the world the true essence of courage. Big Sky, Montana. Altitude 7,218 feet. The mercury registered 8° F and was steadily dropping. The blizzard had swept in 2 days prematurely, thundering across the mountain range with the force of an ice-laden locomotive, the constricted service path snaking. Through Gallatin Canyon lay almost obscured beneath 6 inches of newly fallen powder, with accumulation increasing by the minute. Trees groaned audibly under the oppressive burden of snow. The landscape was a stark white, and a profound silence reigned until a howl shattered it. This was not a summons for companionship. It was a broken, low cry, the kind that seemed to claw at one's insides before escaping into the atmosphere. Deputy Ranger Mark Jennings brought the truck to a standstill, cutting the engine. At 42, Jennings possessed broad shoulders and a square jaw, a man who seemed to embody the storm within his very being, and seldom spoke unless the words carried weight. His gray fleece jacket, adorned with the county wildlife emblem, was faded from countless years of patrol. He inclined forward in the driver's seat, eyes narrowed against the tempest. Beside him, slumped in the passenger seat, was Nathan "Nate" Cole, a wildlife technician in his late 20s, distinguished by a wiry frame, unruly blonde hair, and hands that nervously drummed against his thermos. Raised on a horse ranch, Nate could interpret animal tracks as if they were script in a novel. Despite his intelligence and keen eyesight, Nate was still regarded as inexperienced by Jennings's seasoned standards. He was also the first to voice his thoughts. "That was no coyote," he declared, sitting up straighter. Jennings emitted a grunt. "Definitely something different." They pursued the sound, venturing off-road on snowshoes, their flashlights carving beams through the swirling whiteness. The wind assaulted their coats, shrieking through the pine trees, but the sound recurred, nearer this time. It was Nate who first discerned the shape. A dark protuberance near the base of a ridge, partially engulfed by snow. "There," he uttered, quickening his pace. Upon reaching it, the spectacle brought them both to an abrupt halt. A dog, a large German shepherd, its body coiled tightly, half submerged in a snowdrift. One paw was extended protectively over a smaller figure nestled against its chest. The large dog's fur was matted with ice, its breathing shallow and slow, eyes half closed but vigilant. When Jennings extended a hand, the dog emitted a low, rasping growl, not of aggression, but of sheer desperation. The smaller shape stirred. Puppy, merely 4 or 5 weeks old, trembled beneath the shelter of the older dog's form. Its fur was a reddish-brown, suggesting a shepherd mix. It whimpered faintly, then lapsed into stillness once more. Jennings crouched, his voice subdued. "Easy now, fella. We're not here to harm you." He removed his glove and slowly reached out. The large shepherd made no attempt to bite, merely twitching an ear in acknowledgement of the gesture. "Good heavens," Nate whispered. "He's been positioned like this for days, hasn't he?" "Appears so." They dared not move them immediately. Warmth was the priority. Nate hurried back to the truck while Jennings remained, carefully brushing away the snow from around the dogs. The storm intensified further up the ridge. Wind whipped Jennings's coat and stung his cheeks. The German shepherd's name was unknown, but an understanding in his eyes suggested he recognized them, not as men, but as rescuers. Nevertheless, he didn't budge an inch, even as aid approached. Nate returned bearing an insulated thermal blanket and the portable heat mat they always kept in the truck. "We'll need to load them carefully," he proposed, "one by one." "That won't be feasible," Jennings stated, his gaze locked with the dogs. "He won't abandon the pup, not until it's secure." Nate hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "Then we transport them together." It was a constrained fit in the rear of the truck. They transformed the bed into a makeshift recovery area, lining it with blankets, activating the heat mat, and situating both dogs in a corner. The shepherd's body instinctively curled around the puppy again. He released a soft, weary sigh. Jennings secured the truck bed and rapped on the roof. "Let's get moving." By the time they arrived at the county wildlife station situated on the town's periphery, the snowfall had escalated into a near whiteout. Awaiting them in the compact garage bay, already prepared thanks to their radio communication, was Dr. Olivia Reed, 37 years of age, tall and slender like a willow, with profound brown eyes and a distinctive streak of white hair running through her auburn ponytail. Her substantial green jacket was patched at the elbows, and her gloved hands moved with an air of clinical composure. Olivia had previously managed a wildlife rescue unit in Arizona before returning to her hometown to look after her ailing father. Following his passing 2 winters prior, she had remained, discovering solace in the tranquility of the mountains and the companionship of the injured. When she laid eyes on the shepherd, her breath hitched. "Oh, my goodness." She crouched instantly, gently stroking his head. "He's still protecting him." Jennings nodded. Wouldn't budge even as he was freezing. They moved both dogs to the examination room inside. Olivia worked swiftly, placing warming pads beneath the pup and assessing its vital signs. "Male," she announced. 5 weeks old, dehydrated, borderline hypothermic. No apparent fractures, no identification tag." Her assistant, Kevin Chen, a softly spoken college student with wide eyes and a round face, tenderly cleaned the shepherd's paws. "He has torn pads, bruised ribs, and some old lacerations. But these aren't fresh injuries." Olivia's hand stilled on the dog's neck. "Hold on. There's something beneath his collar." She tugged gently and located it. A minuscule strip of metal, its inscription barely decipherable. 2 words were etched into it. "Protect him." A hush fell over the room. Nate finally broke the silence. "So, what's the plan now?" Olivia gazed down at the shepherd, who was observing her with unwavering amber eyes. She touched his cheek. "Now, we heed what he's been endeavoring to communicate to us." The snowfall had intensified, transforming from flurries into an unyielding deluge of white. By the time Deputy Jennings, Nate, and Olivia had loaded both dogs into the truck bed, visibility had diminished to less than 20 feet. The road, leading back to town, already perilous, was now buried under drifts and treacherous black ice. Even with chains on the tires, Jennings was unwilling to risk the winding switchbacks that descended the canyon in this blizzard. "We're not making it anywhere tonight," he stated flatly, his voice muffled by his scarf. Olivia glanced from the dashboard GPS to the icy emptiness beyond the windshield. "There's a service cabin approximately a mile further up. It's off the main grid, but it's stocked. It'll be more secure than attempting to push through." They concurred without additional debate. Jennings cautiously eased the truck forward, tires crunching through the snow while the heater blasted hot air into the cab. In the back, enveloped in thermal blankets, Ranger and the pup lay side by side on the portable warming mat. The older dog had remained motionless since being placed there. He only opened his eyes briefly whenever the wind buffeted the truck's frame, as if evaluating potential danger. The pup, smaller than a barn cat, had curled tightly into his chest. When they reached the ranger cabin, the world outside had faded to an ethereal blue. The wind shrieked across the window panes as Jennings reversed the truck alongside. The cabin was a single-story wooden structure with a slanted tin roof, its walls coated in decades of pine sap and weathered by wind. The chimney had long been derelict, but a solar-powered battery system kept an emergency light functioning above the door. Inside, the temperature hovered just above freezing. Nate hurried to connect the backup heater while Jennings hauled in supplies from the truck. Olivia followed with the crate containing the two dogs, gently placing it near the heater's coil. "I'll prepare the portable IV for fluids," she said, unzipping her medical pack. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her gaze never strayed from the shepherd. He's still conscious, but just barely. Nate hunched over the cabin's storage bin, produced a dented thermos and several heating packs. Still no signal. On the radio. No prospect of calling for an evacuation tonight. Olivia knelt beside the pup. She gently lifted its head, inspecting its gums, then ran her hand along its spine. Dehydrated but not starving. Someone was feeding him, at least until recently. She paused. "Wait. What's this?" Nate approached. Olivia lifted the pup again and carefully turned its side towards the lantern light. Just beneath the left foreleg, concealed under thick fur, was a faint scar. "Not from an accident. This is a clean surgical incision." Her brows furrowed as she reached into her pocket and retrieved a pen light. "I've encountered this type of scar before," she murmured. Jennings raised his head from where Olivia exhaled slowly. "From this distance, this scar, I made this incision." She stood, walking to her vet bag and pulling out a weathered leather journal. She flipped through pages filled with case notes, sketches, and tiny paw print stamps. Finally, she arrived at an entry dated 7 weeks prior. "Shepherd mix puppy, male, estimated 3 weeks old, treated for mild dehydration and flea dermatitis. No tag. Brought in anonymously, left overnight in a crate." "But there's no record of discharge," Jennings observed. "Precisely," Olivia said. "Someone took him without informing me. Someone who wished to avoid paperwork." Nate frowned. "Do you suspect he was stolen? Perhaps. Or maybe someone didn't want to leave any trace. But if this is the same pup, then that dog—" She gestured towards Ranger. "Didn't just discover him. He's been protecting him for weeks." They lapsed into silence for a moment. Outside, the wind slammed against the cabin walls as if attempting to force entry. Ranger stirred slightly. His breath fogged in the cold air, but he didn't alter his position. The pup emitted a small, sharp whine, and Olivia instinctively reached out to comfort. That engraving on the collar," Nate said suddenly. "Protect him." "Could it be from whoever dropped off the pup?" Olivia shook her head. "No tag, no note. But perhaps they intended it for Ranger. Maybe he's more than just an ordinary dog. Maybe he was trained to safeguard something precious." Jennings returned from securing the door. "Well, he succeeded. The pup's still alive, albeit barely." Olivia looked back at the German shepherd. Even from the corner with the heater humming, she could perceive his exhaustion. But it was a weariness she recognized well, the kind that stemmed not merely from cold or hunger, but from a conscious decision to remain vigilant far beyond one's limits. Choosing to guard something instead of succumbing, she moved to the edge of the crate and placed a bowl of warm glucose solution inside. "Let's see if you'll take this, big fella." Ranger didn't move initially, then slowly. One ear twitched. He lifted his head just enough to sniff the bowl. A few seconds elapsed. Then his tongue dipped in once, twice, enough to indicate interest. "He's not out of danger," she said softly, "but that's a positive sign." Hours crept by. The storm showed no indication of abating, and they resigned themselves to a night in the cabin. Ranger drank a little more. The pup began to twitch gently in its sleep. And Olivia, seated in a folding chair near the crate, finally permitted herself to rest her back against the wall. She watched them, two survivors, linked by a bond no one yet comprehended. The blizzard had not eased by morning. Dawn brought no illumination, only a diluted grayness that blurred the distinction between forest and sky. Inside the Ranger cabin, the generator hummed softly while a makeshift space heater sputtered warmth across the wooden floor. Ranger lay motionless, curled around the puppy whose belly now rose and fell with a steadier rhythm. Nate slept with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders in the corner, while Jennings sipped weak coffee near the window, observing ice forming on the panes. Olivia sat beside the crate, her eyes fixed on the German shepherd, noting the subtle shift in his breathing, less labored, but still far from strong. When she reached in to check his temperature again, her fingers brushed against a small patch of fur on his flank and felt a raised ridge beneath. A scar, newer than the others. She leaned closer, parting the matted hair. The wound was almost healed, but jagged, with sutures that didn't appear to be veterinary work, more like field stitching. Not by my hand or anyone trained, she thought. "Mark," she said without looking up. "Come take a look at this." He approached in silence. She pressed his hand to the same spot. "That's no accident?" Mark's brow furrowed. "A knife or wire? Possibly barbed, but it's been stitched up. Someone cared enough to close it, but not enough to bring him in for proper treatment." As she spoke, Ranger stirred slightly, his ears twitching. His eyes, amber and unreadable, opened just enough to meet hers. Then softly, he growled, not at her, but at something else, at the window. Mark instinctively turned. "What's out there?" The growl subsided, but Ranger didn't break his stare. His body tensed as though anticipating something, or someone. Olivia moved to the window, brushing condensation from the glass. Snow still fell heavily, but in the clearing about 20 feet from the cabin, she saw something faint. A dark line, too straight to be natural. Mark grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Nate followed, wiping sleep from his eyes. They found it quickly, a trail of frozen blood, thin, brittle, already fading beneath new snow, but unmistakable. It led into the trees towards the ridge. "Could be from Ranger," Nate offered. Olivia shook her head. "No, this isn't old enough. He's been with us since last night. This is fresh." Mark exchanged a look with her. "We follow it, just far enough to determine its destination." They geared up and left Ranger and the pup in the cabin, barricading the door and leaving Olivia's number scrawled on the inside panel, in case someone arrived. The wind bit at their cheeks as they followed the trail, weaving between pines heavy with snow. The blood droplets became more spaced out, but they persisted. It wasn't until they reached a patch of frozen brush beneath, a leaning fir tree, that they saw it clearly. The snow had been disturbed, scattered as if something had collapsed or thrashed about. There was a broken branch nearby, and under it, partially buried in ice, they found fur, black, coarse, not from a deer or wolf. Dog hair. Mark knelt, brushing frost away. Another patch of blood and something else, shredded fabric. A piece of a jacket sleeve. "Someone was here," he muttered, "and injured." Nate scanned the trees. But why leave? And where did they go? Olivia's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. The signal had returned faintly. One missed call, no caller ID. A moment later, it rang again. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, mid-range, unfamiliar, calm but strained. You have them, don't you? Olivia's hand tightened around the phone. Who is this? The black dog, the small brown one. You have them? Her voice dropped. Who are you? I'm the one who lost them, the man said. And now I want them back. Olivia signaled to Mark, who immediately motioned for Nate to remain silent. If you care about them, tell me who you are. Come forward. But the line went dead. No sound. No click. Just silence. They returned to the cabin with increased urgency. Ranger had risen slightly when they arrived, head lifted, growling low and steady. The pup whimpered, but stayed curled close. We're not alone out here, Mark said. Nate glanced towards the ridge. You think someone's watching us? I think someone's been watching for a while. Olivia replayed the words in her head. The caller had known what the dogs looked like, too detailed for coincidence. And if he had access to their location, either he had been nearby or he was part of something larger. Back in the cabin, Olivia pulled a dog brush from her kit and began gently cleaning the pup's fur. Underneath the dirt, small burrs and crusted blood, the pup's coat was soft and even, once well-groomed. She looked at Ranger again. You didn't just stumble across him, she said aloud. You were assigned to him or trained for him. That's what this is, isn't it? The shepherd's gaze didn't leave her. Then he did something that stopped them all. He rose, shakily, legs trembling, but he stood, still weak, but driven by something deeper than strength. He turned towards the cabin door and stared. Mark stepped forward. You want us to follow? Ranger let out a quiet whine. Then he pawed at the door once, just once. The storm had finally broken. By late morning, the skies had calmed into a pale, heavy gray, and the snow fell softly, no longer blinding. Ranger stood near the cabin door, his body still unsteady, but his posture firm, watchful. When Mark opened the door, the shepherd took one slow step forward onto the ice-packed porch, sniffed the air, and looked back at them, waiting. They followed him in silence, staying close and keeping their pace slow for his sake. The blood trail had faded under the new snow, but Ranger seemed to remember the direction, veering off the main path and down an overgrown service trail that hadn't been cleared in years. The terrain sloped downward into a shallow ravine where the skeletal remains of a split-rail fence emerged from the white, guiding them towards something unnatural. Rusted metal, broken cinder blocks, and what looked like the bones of a forgotten outpost. It had once been a compound, a cluster of prefabricated buildings now sunken into the ground, their roofs bowed under the weight of snow and time. One structure still bore a crooked sign, its letters faded but legible. Sable Ridge Wildlife Care Center. Mark frowned. That place was shut down 5 years ago. Olivia nodded grimly. For animal welfare violations. We used to send rescues here, until the audit. As they moved closer, Nate broke off towards a half-collapsed kennel run on the south side. The wire mesh had been torn outward, as if something had forced its way through from inside. This wasn't age or weather, he said. Something fought to get out. Inside the nearest structure, the smell hit first. Mildew, urine, the long decayed scent of neglect. The walls were stained, and the light that filtered through the broken windows was weak and cold. They stepped cautiously over piles of newspaper, empty feed bags, shattered crates. Olivia spotted something under a toppled shelf, a crumpled fleece blanket. She knelt, lifting it gently, and found a corner stained deep red. A familiar smell clung to it, coppery, sharp, and distinctly canine. Ranger's scent, she murmured. Mark crouched beside her. Are you sure? She nodded. He bled here. Ranger himself stood frozen just beyond the threshold, ears back, tail still, breathing heavily. He didn't enter. Instead, he whined, a low, almost pained sound, and turned his head away. Nate returned with a small bundle in his hands, a collar torn at the buckle, with a bent ID tag barely hanging on. "There's a name," he said, squinting. "Buddy?" Olivia took the tag and turned it over. The backside had a clinic code etched into it. Her clinic. "This dog was registered through me, but I never saw this collar. I never treated a buddy." They searched deeper into the compound, pushing through moldy files and splintered furniture until they reached what had once been the main office. The Kai. Room was windowless, but a filing cabinet in the back had been forced open. Most of the folders were gone, burned or removed, but one had slipped behind the cabinet, half crushed and damp. Olivia pulled it free and flipped through the brittle pages. "Intake logs," she said, scanning, "but no discharge records. Look at this. These dogs were signed in, assigned temporary ID codes, and then nothing. No transfers, no adoptions, no deaths reported." Mark's face darkened. "So where did they go?" As if answering the question, Ranger stepped forward into the room and walked slowly to the far corner. There, under a thin layer of frost, was a dented stainless steel dog bowl. He nudged it once with his snout, then backed away and sat down, staring at them. Nate crouched, brushing snow aside, revealing more of the floor, a series of parallel scratch marks, long and erratic, like claws scrabbling for escape. "This isn't a shelter," Olivia said quietly. "It was a warehouse." Mark straightened. "And Ranger was here." They emerged from the building and continued their sweep of the grounds. Towards the edge of the property, past the last line of collapsed fencing, Nate called out again. "Over here!" They joined him at the base of a tree, where he held up a metal hook, half buried in the dirt, attached to a frayed rope. Nearby, an old transport cage lay on its side, broken open, its hinges splintered. "There was a struggle," Nate said, "and someone didn't want them found." Olivia's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. A text message this time, from an unknown number. "Stay out of this. You don't know what you're walking into." She showed the message to Mark. He stared at the phone, jaw tightening. "Looks like someone's afraid we'll find the rest." In the truck, Olivia sat beside Ranger, her hand resting gently on his back. "You escaped," she said softly. "You saved the puppy. You brought us here." The shepherd didn't move, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders, the readiness, the burden. "He was trained," she added, thinking aloud. "Not just a rescue dog. A therapy dog, maybe even more. That's why he was at that compound." Nate turned around from the front seat. "How do you know?" Olivia reached into her bag and produced an old laminated flyer, creased and folded from years in her field kit. On the front was a photo of a German shepherd in a blue vest beside a young boy in a wheelchair. The caption read, "Therapy Partners. Bridging Hope." She placed the flyer beside Ranger. "That's you, isn't it?" The dog closed his eyes, and for the first time let out a sound. Not a growl or whine, but a breath, long, steady, like release. The wind had gone quiet again, leaving the forest still and heavy. Tree branches sagged under new snow, and every breath the team took rose in clouds. Olivia walked slightly ahead of the others, her boots crunching softly as they moved downhill. From the ruins of Sable Ridge, Ranger walked beside her, limping but insistent. He'd refused to rest since they left the site, and now his pace quickened with each step. He kept glancing to his left, towards the deep slope of a ravine that split from the old trail. Mark caught up, his rifle slung behind his shoulder. Not for threat, but for precaution. "Where's he taking us now?" he asked, breath fogging the air. Olivia didn't answer. She didn't have to. She could see it in Ranger's movements, his ears upright, head low, nose cutting through the air, as if memory itself had a scent. She felt her chest tighten. Ranger wasn't just tracking. He was reliving something. They came to a break in the tree line where the snow deepened suddenly. Ranger stopped and looked up at them. One paw lifted. Then he barked, just once, sharp, urgent. Nate arrived last, holding a portable radio that had finally picked up a weak signal. "Still no dispatch reply," he muttered, but trailed off when he saw where they stood. The ground sloped downward in a gentle drift, leading to what looked like a snow-covered embankment. A strip of road, barely visible, ran beneath it, and something metallic glinted under the white. "Vehicle," Mark said. They descended carefully, the crusted snow cracking beneath their steps. At the base, half buried, was the roof of a silver SUV. The snow had drifted over most of the vehicle, but a side mirror stuck out, cracked and frosted. Olivia reached the driver's side, brushing snow away from the window with her sleeve. Inside was darkness. Then she saw the outline of a face, still frozen, female. Her breath caught. "There's someone inside?" Mark pried open the driver's door while Nate moved to the passenger side. The cold air that rushed out was sharp with the smell of old plastic, gasoline, and something fainter, like wet wool and milk. Inside, the woman sat slumped, face pale and blue, hands still clutched around the steering wheel. She couldn't have been more than 30, a brunette with delicate features, her face etched with a kind of quiet desperation, even in death. Olivia's voice cracked. "She's been here for days." Behind her, Nate opened the back seat and found a canvas diaper bag. He unzipped it and pulled out a bottle of powdered milk, a pack of formula, and wrapped tightly in a Ziploc bag, a small baby blanket with paw prints. "She was traveling with the pup," he murmured. "She brought supplies for him." Mark stepped back, drawing in the full scope of the scene. The snow covered the car. Nobody knew she was here. Ranger let out a low sound, a half whine, half chuff, and moved to the rear of the vehicle. There, beneath a ridge of snow and ice, was a cell phone. Cracked screen, dead battery, but the case had a faded sticker. "Adopt, don't shop." They brought it back to the truck and plugged it into Nate's charger. The screen lit up dimly, and after several failed tries, Olivia guessed the passcode, 1102. A child's birthday. The phone unlocked. There were messages. The last outgoing text was never sent. Frozen in the outbox. "He took the other dogs. I'm going to find Buddy. If I don't come back, tell someone. His name is Ranger. He's not just a dog. He's trained. He'll protect him." Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she opened. The photo gallery. The last image had been taken just a few days earlier. The woman, smiling, in front of the SUV, holding the brown puppy, smaller than he was now, wrapped in the same blanket Nate had found. In the background, Ranger stood alert, ears forward, wearing no collar, no vest. "Her name's Sarah Miller," Olivia said quietly. "I recognize her now. She brought in stray dogs 2 years ago during the spring floods. Sweet, soft-spoken. She always wanted to foster, but didn't have the means. I think she finally did." Nate leaned over her shoulder. "She mentioned he took the other dogs. That has to be her ex." Mark nodded grimly. "And if he's tied to Sable Ridge, then she probably found out what they were doing and ran." Olivia looked at Ranger, and he followed. Ranger stared back. Then slowly, as if the moment deserved reverence, he lay down beside the blanket. His tail didn't wag, but his eyes softened, and he closed them. They returned to the wildlife station in silence. Snow had lightened to a drifting whisper, but the sky remained low and gray. The roads had been plowed just enough to allow a slow descent. Back to town, where the main office stood in a grove of firs like a sentinel. Ranger lay quietly in the back of the truck bed beside the pup, who now stirred more regularly, its breath stronger with each passing hour. Olivia rode in the passenger seat, Sarah Miller's phone in her coat pocket, her fingers absently brushing over it as though trying to warm something far colder than glass. They reached the station by late afternoon. As Mark pulled in, they noticed a black SUV already waiting outside. A man stood beside it, tall and lean, wearing a tailored coat far too thin for the weather, and holding a manila folder in gloved hands. Olivia tensed immediately. "Who on earth is that?" Nate stepped down from the truck. "Looks like he's been waiting for a while." The man approached with a calm, purposeful stride. His name, he said, was Gregory Vance. Mid-40s, olive skin, dark. Hair peppered with gray at the temples, eyes so light they looked colorless. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried himself with an air of practiced civility. "Dr. Reed," he greeted Olivia, extending the folder. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Mark stepped between them. "State your business." Gregory offered a faint smile. "I represent a private canine recovery service contracted with a defunct rescue operation in Missoula. The German Shepherd you're harboring was part of an experimental therapy program and was marked missing. I've brought the recovery paperwork and reacquisition authorization." Olivia took the folder, flipping through the pages. The documents looked official, typed, stamped, even notarized, but something in her gut twisted. "Where's your license to transport across county lines? And who exactly contracted you?" Gregory's smile didn't waver. "Unfortunately, the organization was absorbed into a private entity before litigation could be completed. I'm not at liberty to disclose their name." "That's convenient," Mark muttered. Behind them, Ranger began to growl. Low at first, then louder, throat rumbling as he stood and stepped down from the truck bed, positioning himself in front of the puppy. His body stiffened, ears pinned, teeth bared. It was not fear, it was fury. Gregory's eyes flicked to the dog. He remembers. Olivia stepped back now, gripping the collar with both hands. She crouched beside Ranger, one hand gently running under the leather where it met fur, brushing past. The tag marked, "Protect him." Something sharp pricked her thumb. "A chip," she murmured. Nate appeared beside her with the portable scanner from inside the station. Olivia held it over the collar base. A faint beep. The screen lit up. ID VTR 2410. Registered. Valor Therapeutic Rehabilitation Program. Status, terminated. Handler, discontinued. Custody, unassigned. Mark leaned over her shoulder. "Unassigned? Doesn't say Vance." Olivia turned back to Gregory. "According to this, he has no listed owner. He's not yours." Gregory's voice cooled. "You don't understand what that dog is. He's not a pet. He's property, developed, trained, and maintained under private funding. He's a controlled asset." Ranger snarled. Olivia stood, stepping between them. "He's a living creature, and judging by the scars and behavior, he was mistreated. This chip proves only that he was discarded." Gregory's expression darkened. "You're interfering with recovery protocol. That's a violation of—" Mark raised a hand. "Enough. You can take your protocol. And leave. The dog stays." Gregory opened his mouth to protest when another vehicle pulled into the lot. A white SUV marked Gallatin County Animal Welfare Division. The woman who stepped out was in her early 50s, broad-shouldered and composed. Her name was Laura Bishop, the newly appointed regional welfare supervisor. She wore a thick utility jacket, khaki pants, and heavy snow boots. Her blonde gray hair was pulled back in a utilitarian bun, and her expression was unreadable. Laura was known for being strict but fair. Her reputation forged by uncovering abuse at a private zoo in Idaho 5 years earlier, an event that hardened her views on private animal ownership. She glanced at the scene, the growling dog, the folder in Gregory's hands, the guarded stance of the others. "I got a call," she said to Mark. "Someone reported a transport violation involving an unlicensed handler." Mark didn't flinch. "That would be him." Gregory stepped forward, irritation barely masked. "Director Bishop, I assure you I'm acting within recovery parameters." Laura held up a hand, already scanning the folder he handed her. "This paperwork isn't valid in this county, and this program," she tapped the header, "was shut down." "I know. I helped write the final report." Gregory's jaw clenched. Laura turned to Olivia. "Dr. Reed, you're in possession of a chipped animal from a defunct agency. Current law states that custody reverts to local authorities for reassessment. If the animal is stable and not dangerous, you may proceed with placement or extended care." Olivia nodded. "Understood." Laura gave a short nod and stepped closer to Ranger, crouching. "You remember me?" she asked softly. "You were at the Missoula site, weren't you?" "You were quieter then." Ranger didn't growl. He lowered his head slowly as if recognizing her scent. Laura reached forward and gently ran her hand along his back, stopping over one of the healing scars. Her voice was soft. "No one's taking you. Again." "Not like that." Gregory exhaled sharply. "This isn't over." Laura straightened. "It is for today. Leave." Gregory hesitated, but with 3 witnesses, a county vehicle, and a dog still poised to defend the pup behind him, he turned and walked briskly to his SUV. Gravel crunched under his boots as he drove off, tires spinning slightly in the packed snow. Mark watched him go. "He'll be back." Laura looked at Olivia. "So will I, to file the official transfer." Ranger relaxed, finally settling into the snow, eyes on the pup. Olivia placed a blanket over both of them and whispered, "Not property." "Not anymore." 2 days had passed since Gregory Vance drove away in silence, and the storm clouds that had loomed over Big Sky for a week finally broke into sunlight. Snow still clung stubbornly to rooftops and roadsides, but the air was lighter now, crisp, clean, and no longer filled with threats. At the wildlife station, Ranger lay near the front desk on a thick navy fleece blanket. The small brown puppy, now named Willow, curled tightly into his side. Willow, now more alert, chewed clumsily at a soft toy Olivia had brought in from her. "Clinic." Ranger watched him with quiet attentiveness, his breathing steady, ears twitching with every movement around him. Inside the office, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to focused. Olivia sat at her desk, scrolling through scanned files, newspaper clippings, and archived emails. A local reporter had been calling repeatedly for an interview about the Snow, dog with the heart of a soldier. But Olivia had politely declined every time. She wasn't ready to make this story public, at least not yet. Deputy Mark Jennings leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You know the sheriff's going to want to issue a statement." "I know," Olivia replied, "but let's get the facts straight first." That morning, the sheriff's department had received a report from Detective Robert Stone, a middle-aged investigator from the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. Robert was tall, weathered, and dressed in layers of brown flannel and denim that hadn't changed in 20 years. He was known for being sharp, patient, and immune to flattery, especially when dealing with animal abuse cases. A dog lover himself, Robert had once been suspended for adopting a canine unit without proper clearance. That compassion hadn't faded with time. Robert entered the office, removing his gloves and tucking them into his belt. "I ran the trace on Vance," he said, handing a folder to Olivia. "His real name's Gregory Valerius. Changed it after a sealed charge 10 years ago in Oregon. Neglect and unauthorized breeding in a behavioral research program. The case never saw court. Victims were all animals." Olivia felt her hands clench. "So he's not just opportunistic. He's a repeat offender." "Exactly. And get this," Robert continued. "That puppy Willow, we matched the DNA to hair strands found in Sarah Miller's apartment. He's hers. Confirmed. But Ranger's chip confirms he was transferred months ago under fraudulent paperwork, which makes him stolen." Mark stepped in. "So we're officially looking at 2 victims and a suspect with a history." Robert nodded. "And A potential trafficking network operating under the guise of therapy training. I've already sent the file to the DA. Olivia looked towards Ranger. He kept that puppy alive in a blizzard. He shielded him, starved for him, bled for him, all while running from someone trying to claim him as property. Which makes him more than a victim, Robert said. It makes him a witness. Olivia blinked. Legally, can a dog be a witness? Robert smirked. Not in the traditional sense, but his physical condition, the GPS data, the recovered footage. Everything points to his direct experience being crucial, and that makes him untouchable by the likes of Vance. That afternoon, Laura Bishop returned. She stepped into the station with her signature brisk energy, clipboard in hand, her breath steaming in the winter air. Her presence always felt like the swing of a judge's gavel, quiet but final. I've filed the transfer paperwork, she announced. Ranger is now officially under the protection of the Gallatin County Animal Welfare Division, which means no one touches him without court review. She knelt beside Ranger, running a practiced hand along his back. You did good, old boy. Olivia turned to her. What happens next? Laura stood. We compile the evidence. The report on Sable Ridge, the photos from the compound, Sarah Miller's messages, the vehicle site, the cell phone, the files you found. Vance doesn't know it yet, but the walls are already closing in. Mark walked over to the front counter where the local newspaper, the Gallatin Sentinel, had left a copy. The front page headline read, Mountain Shepherd Saves Puppy in Storm, a Hero in Fur. Too bad the real story's darker than they know, he muttered. Laura tilted her head. Sometimes the darkness makes the light stand out more. Before she left, Laura handed Olivia a microchip registration update. I added your name as co-guardian. Olivia blinked. What? You've earned it, and so has he. Later that evening, a small ceremony was held quietly in the town's municipal office. No cameras, no reporters, just a few people who mattered. Ranger stood on all fours, head high, wearing a simple blue collar. Olivia held the puppy, now named Willow, short for Willow Creek, where he'd been found sheltered, tucked warmly in a gray knit blanket. Sheriff Peterson, a gruff but soft-spoken man with a military background and a fondness for working dogs, presented Olivia with a framed certificate that read, For exceptional loyalty and courage, Ranger of Gallatin County. He looked down at the dog. You remind us all what bravery really looks like. Ranger tilted his head. The room, for a moment, was still, and then Willow barked just once, a small, high sound. Ranger turned towards him, touched noses gently, and then sat down. Spring arrived late to Big Sky that year. Snow still lined the shaded side of the hills, and the wind carried the bite of winter, even as crocuses pushed up through thawing soil. The wildlife station had changed in small but meaningful ways. Windows now bore colorful paw print decals, and a hand-painted wooden sign above a side building read, Hollow Creek Refuge, for the lost and loyal. Olivia Reed stood on the gravel, path that led to the converted barn. She wore her usual field jacket over faded jeans, her auburn hair twisted into a loose braid. Her boots were muddy, but her eyes shone. Since Ranger's rescue and the trial that followed, she'd used her veterinary background and growing support from the county to open a small-scale rehabilitation shelter for abandoned working dogs. There were only 6 runs and a communal play yard, but the place already felt alive. Ranger was no longer a patient. He was staff. The German Shepherd had gained back much of his weight, and though one leg still showed a slight limp from an old tendon injury, his eyes had sharpened. He moved like a sentinel, watchful, measured. He wore a navy blue collar, now stitched with a custom patch. Guardian. It had been a gift from Laura Bishop, who'd visited during the grand opening just 2 weeks earlier, holding back uncharacteristic emotion as she handed Olivia the final permit. Laura, still dressed in practical utility gear, still hid her softness behind clipped sentences. But her voice had caught when she'd whispered to Ranger, "You kept your promise." Olivia watched now as Ranger crossed the open yard, tail low but relaxed. In the sun near the old maple stump lay Birch, the name they'd finally chosen for the pup. No longer a fragile bundle of ribs and fear, Birch had filled out into a strong, golden-brown juvenile with bright eyes and boundless energy. His fur had darkened slightly around the muzzle, and he'd taken to chasing moths and sneaking socks from Olivia's laundry basket. But today, Birch wasn't alone. Curled beside him was a new arrival, a mottled gray and white pup, perhaps 6 weeks old, with a limp in one hind leg and nervous eyes. She'd been found 2 nights ago outside a rest stop off the interstate, tied to a crate with a note that read, "Too much for us." The pup had yet to bark, yet to play, but Birch had taken to her immediately. From the porch, David Ramirez, the young park ranger who had taken Birch under his wing, leaned against the railing with a warm smile. David was 25, lean and quick-footed, with curly black hair he never combed, and a kind face that always seemed one shade from a grin. Though soft-spoken, he moved with quiet confidence, a child of immigrants from New Mexico. David had joined the service after volunteering during the flood evacuations 2 years ago and had bonded deeply with Birch since day one. "She hasn't left his side all morning," David called to Olivia. "Even let him nudge her to the water bowl." Olivia crossed the grass, crouching near the 2 pups. Birch had stretched one paw lightly across the new pup's back, a protective gesture so subtle yet unmistakable. Olivia reached out slowly, running her fingers through the pup's matted fur. She flinched, but didn't retreat. "She's going to be okay," Olivia murmured. Behind them, Ranger sat in the shade, eyes never leaving the scene. When Birch glanced up, at him, something passed between them, something unspoken but solid. Ranger gave a low, approving rumble. That night, after the pups had been fed and the yard had quieted under a sky full of stars, Olivia stepped outside with a thermos of tea. She found Ranger at the edge of the yard, gazing out across the field where deer sometimes wandered at dusk. She sat beside him in silence. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked softly. "You gave him a chance, and now he's doing the same for her." Ranger didn't move, but his tail brushed the ground once. "You could have given up," she added. "In the snow, in that cage, in that life. But you didn't." He turned his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. Olivia smiled. "You're not just a guardian. You're a teacher." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of birch barking, short and playful, followed by the light skitter of paws over gravel. The new pup barked once in return. Olivia stood, watching the 2 figures race through moonlight and shadows, Birch always keeping just a step behind the smaller dog, nudging gently when she slowed. From behind her, Ranger let out a soft, satisfied growl. Then he lay down slowly in the grass, head on his paws, and closed his eyes. He wasn't worried anymore. He'd kept his promise. Sometimes divine messengers arrive not with wings but with paws. Ranger never spoke, yet he imparted profound lessons about loyalty that never falters, love that expects nothing in return, and the quiet fortitude required to protect the innocent. In the heart of the coldest storm, he became a bastion. In the deepest darkness, he shone as a beacon. And through his example, we are reminded that even those who are most broken can be chosen for a sacred purpose. Perhaps you have felt lost. Perhaps you have endured pain. But just like Ranger, your suffering can pave the way for someone else's miracle. And sometimes, the one who provides salvation is also the one who was saved.